Aura Components Basics. Create and edit Aura components. Learning objectives. After completing this unit, you'll be able to create and edit Aura component bundle resources in the developer console, create a harness application for testing components and development, perform the edit and reload cycle for previewing components and development, and list the different resources that make up an Aura component bundle. Creating and editing Aura components. Okay, time to write some code. Finally, the first step to writing Aura component code is getting set up to write code. Fortunately, this is really easy. In your org, open the developer console under your name or the quick access menu. Boom, you're ready to write Aura component code. Create Aura components in the developer console. So let's write something. Select File, New, Lightning Component to create an Aura component. In the new Lightning Component Bundle panel, enter Hello World for the component name and click Submit. This creates a new Hello World component bundle with two open tabs. Close the Hello World tab and keep the Hello World.cmp tab open. Hello World.cmp contains the opening and closing tags for an Aura component. Aura::component. Between them, add the following markup and save. Your component markup should look like the following. Woohoo! Your first Aura component. Now, how do you see what it looks like? The short answer is it's tricky. You can't run your component directly and see how it behaves. Instead, your component needs to run inside a container app, which we'll call a container for short. Examples of containers would be the Lightning Experience or Salesforce apps, or an app you build with Lightning App Builder. Basically, anything you saw at the end of the prior unit. You add your component to one of these containers and then access it within that container. We'll talk more about containers later and in other Lightning Components modules. For now, let's just make a simple one of our own. Select File, New, Lightning Application to create a new Lightning app. In the new Lightning Bundle panel, enter Harness App for the app name and click Submit. This creates a new Harness App bundle, which opens two tabs. Close the Harness App tab and keep the Harness App.app tab open. Harness App.app contains the opening and closing tags for a Lightning app, Aura::application. Between them, add the following markup and save. This adds the Hello World component we created earlier to the Harness App. Before we explain this deceptively simple app, click back and forth between the Harness App.app and Hello World.cmp tabs in the developer console. Besides the markup, what do you notice that's different? Got it? And 1. The preview button. Apps have one, components do not. Click it now, and another browser window should open and show you your app. Now we're cooking with, well, okay, it's just Hello World. But there are some interesting things to notice here, in spite of the markup being trivial. Let's start with the developer console. If you've used it to write Visualforce or Apex, you have surely noticed the extra controls that appear in a palette on the right side of the editing window of any Lightning bundle. Each of the different buttons with a Create label creates a different resource you can add to the bundle. We'll talk about resources and bundles in the next section. For now, just know that the developer console gives you an easy way to create and switch between them. Indeed, the developer console has a number of features for working with Aura components. There's also File, Open, Lightning Resources, which lets you open a bundle of Lightning resources all at once. Useful. The developer console is a fine place to write Lightning code, and we'll work with it for the rest of this module. But because Lightning resources are accessible via the tooling API, there are other ways to create and edit them. Salesforce DX provides robust support for all aspects of developing Lightning components. The Force.com IDE is a good standalone client, and there are some excellent third-party tools such as Sublime Lightning and VS Code. Don't feel like you're limited to just the developer console. One last thing before we turn to the code. The URL for our preview is actually the permanent home for our app once it's made available to our users. The format of the URL is the following: https://yourdomain.lightning.force.com/your namespace/your app name.app. Your app name represents the name of your bundle, in this case, Harness App. In your Trailhead org, you shouldn't have a namespace configured, so you should see a C in that part of the URL. C represents the default namespace, and it will come back to haunt us later. The rest of the URL format should be self-explanatory. Okay, on to the code. What is a component? It's not that often that hello world triggers existential questions, but here we are. Let's talk about what a component is in the context of our hello world example. As a practical matter, a component is a bundle that includes a definition resource written in markup and may include additional optional resources like a controller, style sheet, and so on. A resource is sort of like a file but stored in Salesforce rather than on a file system. Our hello world.cmp component definition resource is easy to understand. There are the opening and closing Aura component tags with some static HTML between them. It would be hard to be more simple, and you might be tempted to think of it as a page. Don't. We'll come back to this in a bit. We've mentioned component bundles already, but what are they really? A bundle is sort of like a folder. It groups the related resources for a single component. Resources in a bundle are auto-wired together via a naming scheme for each resource type. Auto-wiring just means that a component definition can reference its controller, helper, etc., and those resources can reference the component definition. They are hooked up to each other, mostly automatically. Let's see how this works. With hello world.cmp active, click the Style button in the component palette on the right. This opens a new tab for the style resource that was added to the Hello World bundle. It starts with a single empty selector, .this. To see how this works, add a simple style to the style sheet so that it looks like the following. Then reload your preview window for harnessapp.app. Voila, large your text. But how does .this work? This is the magic of auto-wiring. At runtime, .this is replaced with a style scoping string named for your component. It limits style rules to only this component so that you can create styles that are specific to the component without worrying about how those styles might affect other components. So now, our Hello World bundle has two resources, the component definition, hello world.cmp, and the style sheet, hello world.css. You can think of it like a folder or an outline. Hello World, the component bundle, hello world.cmp, the component's definition, hello world.css, the component's style. As you can see in the developer console, there are a number of other resource types you can add to a component bundle. Go ahead and click the controller and helper items to add those resources to the bundle. Now your bundle looks something like this, and you can start to see the naming system. Hello World, the component bundle, hello world.cmp, the component's definition, hello world controller.js, the component's controller or main JavaScript file, hello world helper.js, the component's helper or secondary JavaScript file, and hello world.css, the component's styles. In this module, we'll work only with these four resource types. We'll talk a lot more about the controller and helper resources when we actually start writing code for them. For now, you can just leave the default implementations. After all, this is just Hello World. What is an app? Now that we know what a component is, it's actually easy to explain what an app is. An app is just a special kind of component. For the purposes of this module, you can think of an app as being different from a component in only two meaningful ways. An app uses Aura application tags instead of Aura component tags. Only an app has a preview button in the developer console. That's it. What are apps for? As simple as that sounds, there are a few practical details in how you can use an app versus a component. The main items are the following. When writing markup, you can add a component to an app, but you can't add an app to another app or an app to a component. An app has a standalone URL that you can access while testing and which you can publish to your users. We often refer to these standalone apps as my.app. You can't add apps to Lightning Experience or the Salesforce app. You can only add components. After the last unit, this might sound weird. What exactly do you add to the app launcher, if not an app? What you add to the app launcher is a Salesforce app, which wraps up an Aura component, something defined in a Aura component tag. An Aura components app, that is, something defined in a Aura application, can't be used to create Salesforce apps. A bit weird, but there it is. So, what's an app good for? Why would you ever use one? We answered that question earlier. You publish functionality built with Lightning components and containers. Lightning components apps are one kind of container for our Lightning components. Once again, being practical, this usually means that you build all of your app functionality inside a top-level component. Then at the end, you stick that one component in a container. Maybe a Lightning components app, maybe the Salesforce app, maybe something else. If you use a my.app, the container can set up services for your main component, but otherwise it's just there to host the component. Let's take another look at the app we created. Here again is the harnessapp.app definition resource. No matter how much functionality we decide we're going to add to our Hello World app, it's all going to go inside the Hello World component. It could have a Quip style editor embedded in it for revising the hello message, but our harnessapp.app definition is going to remain pretty much this simple. From here on, we'll assume that you're using an actual Lightning application bundle as just a container or harness for components you create. Feel free to keep using harnessapp.app, but when we talk about creating apps, we'll really mean building functionality inside a component bundle, not an application bundle, because that's how you build apps in the real world. Components containing components containing components. The harnessapp.app definition is also interesting because instead of static HTML, we have our Hello World component. We say that harness app contains the Hello World component. Let's dive into this a little bit and make Hello World a little more complex. In the developer console, create an Aura component named Hello Heading. For its markup, paste the following code. Now click back to helloworld.cmp and add C:"Hello World" / to it. Above the Hello Lightning line, your Hello World component definition should now look like this. Reload the app to see the change. Your component structure in terms of what contains what now looks like this. Harnessapp.app, helloworld.cmp, helloheading.cmp, static HTML. We say that Hello Heading is a child component of Hello World, or that Hello Heading is nested inside Hello World, or there are any number of different ways to say that Hello World contains Hello Heading. What's more, you can keep nesting components inside other components down to pretty much any level you'd care to. It starts being too hard to keep straight in your head well before you run into a limitation of Lightning components. This process of putting components inside each other is fundamental to building Lightning components apps. You start with or build simple fine-grained components where each component provides a defined set of self-contained functionality. Then you assemble those components into new components with higher level functionality, and then you use those components and level up again.
Let's talk about that with a metaphor that's similar to us outside of the software context. Imagine a house. Better yet, let us show you one. When you look at this house, what do you see? If you stop thinking of it as a house, but as a house component, you also start to see the pieces and patterns it's made of. At the largest scale, this house is composed of 3 similar structures. Those 3 components have similar, but not identical designs. Each can be broken down further into even smaller components, such as windows, which can be broken down into individual panes. The arrangement or composition of these smaller components defines the difference between the 3 larger structures. The 3 structures are joined together by 2 smaller, narrow structures or components, which can themselves be broken down into smaller, reusable patterns. These connecting components bring the 3 separate structures together into a larger whole, the house. As we did with the architecture, so we can do with a web app. Later in this module, you'll take fine-grained input components and create a form component with them. Then you'll take that form component and put it into another component to build up to app-level functionality. It's not as pretty to look at as the house, but the principles behind the composition process are very similar. Thinking in terms of components and composition is a fundamental skill you'll develop throughout this module and whenever you build apps with Lightning components. You've done a little bit of that here, but before you can really build components that do something, we need to learn about attributes, types, values, and expressions. Before that though,